At 10:22 a.m. on June 4, 1942, Lieutenant Commander Wade McClusky pushed the stick forward on his Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bomber 20,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean, 200 miles northwest of Midway Atoll. Below him, 4 Japanese aircraft carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, were preparing to launch a second strike against American forces. Behind McClusky, 32 more Dauntless dive bombers from USS Enterprise followed him into their attack dive. In the next 6 minutes, these aircraft would sink 3 of those carriers and change the course of World War II. The Douglas SBD Dauntless was not supposed to be at Midway. By June 1942, the aircraft was already considered obsolete by many in the U.S. Navy. Designed in 1938, the SBD, officially designated Scout Bomber Douglas, had a maximum speed of just 255 miles per hour, making it one of the slowest combat aircraft in the Pacific theater. The Japanese Mitsubishi A6M Zero fighter could reach 331 miles per hour. Even the slower Kai-43 Oscar fighter topped out at 329 mph. In aerial combat, speed meant survival. The Dauntless was 75 miles per hour slower than the fighters hunting it. Japanese pilots had nicknamed the SBD the Easy Meat because of its low speed and apparent vulnerability. Intelligence reports from the Battle of Coral Sea 1 month earlier documented Japanese fighter pilots dismissing the Dauntless as too slow to evade, too weak to fight back. One captured Japanese pilot, interrogated after Coral Sea, stated, "The American dive bomber is obsolete. It cannot match the Zero in speed, climb rate, or maneuverability. It is target practice." That assessment seemed confirmed by casualty reports. At Coral Sea, 22 Dauntless bombers had been shot down by Zero fighters and anti-aircraft fire. Survival rates for Dauntless crews facing determined fighter opposition were less than 60%. The U.S. Navy knew the Dauntless was obsolete. Development of its replacement, the Curtiss SB-2C Helldiver, had begun in 1939. The Helldiver would be faster, carry more bombs, and have better defensive armament. Production was scheduled to begin in June 1942. But production delays meant the Helldiver wouldn't reach fleet squadrons until 1943 at the earliest. For the Battle of Midway, the Navy had no choice. The Dauntless was the only carrier-based dive bomber available in sufficient numbers. If American forces were going to stop the Japanese advance across the Pacific, they would have to do it with an aircraft everyone agreed was too slow, too vulnerable, and too obsolete to survive modern aerial combat. But the SBD Dauntless had one advantage that no one, including the Japanese, fully appreciated. It was the most accurate dive bomber ever built. And in 6 minutes over the Pacific Ocean on June 4, 1942, that accuracy would prove more valuable than speed, more deadly than the newest technology, and more decisive than any other factor in the entire Pacific War. The path to Midway began 6 months earlier, on December 7, 1941, when Japanese carrier aircraft attacked Pearl Harbor. The attack destroyed or damaged 21 U.S. Navy ships, killed 2,403 Americans, and demonstrated that aircraft carriers, not battleships, would dominate naval warfare in the Pacific. The Japanese strike force that attacked Pearl Harbor included 6 aircraft carriers: Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, Shokaku, and Zuikaku. These 6 carriers represented the most powerful naval aviation force in the world. Their combined air groups totaled 420 aircraft, operated by the most experienced naval pilots on Earth. Many had combat experience in China dating back to 1937. They had trained for years in carrier operations, dive bombing, torpedo attacks, and fighter tactics. In December 1941, the U.S. Navy had 3 aircraft carriers in the Pacific: Enterprise, Lexington, and Saratoga. Their combined air groups totaled approximately 250 aircraft. Many American pilots had never seen combat. Most had less than 2 years of flight training. The experience gap between Japanese and American carrier pilots was measured in thousands of flight hours and years of combat operations. Japanese naval aviation dominated the Pacific for the first 6 months of the war. Between December 1941 and May 1942, Japanese carriers sank 5 Allied carriers, destroyed over 500 Allied aircraft, and conquered territories spanning from Burma to the Solomon Islands. American attempts to strike back had been limited to hit-and-run raids that achieved little strategic impact. But American intelligence officers had one critical advantage. They could read Japanese naval codes. In early May 1942, U.S. Navy cryptanalysts at Station Hypo in Pearl Harbor, led by Commander Joseph Rochefort, began intercepting Japanese communications about a planned operation against target AF. The Japanese were planning a major offensive, but American codebreakers couldn't determine what AF represented. Was it Pearl Harbor, Midway, the Aleutian Islands? Commander Rochefort proposed a test. Midway would send an uncoded radio message reporting that its fresh water distillation plant had broken down. If Japanese intelligence intercepted that message and reported it, American codebreakers would know that AF meant Midway. On May 20th, Midway sent the uncoded message. 2 days later, Station Hypo intercepted a Japanese intelligence report. AF is short of fresh water. Confirmation. The Japanese were planning to attack Midway Atoll. Admiral Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, had approximately 2 weeks to prepare. The Japanese plan, masterminded by Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, was complex and ambitious. A diversionary attack on the Aleutian Islands would draw American forces north. Then, 4 carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, under the command of Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, would attack Midway Atoll, destroy its defenses, and prepare the way for an amphibious invasion force of 5,000 troops. When American carriers inevitably responded to defend Midway, Japanese carriers would ambush them and destroy the U.S. Pacific Fleet's carrier force in a single decisive battle. It was a sound plan. But it depended on surprise. And thanks to Station Hypo, Admiral Nimitz knew exactly when and where the Japanese would attack. Nimitz positioned 3 carriers northeast of Midway, Enterprise and Hornet, under Rear Admiral Raymond Spruance, and Yorktown under Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher. Yorktown had been damaged at the Battle of Coral Sea and was supposed to require 3 months of repairs. Navy engineers at Pearl Harbor repaired her in 48 hours, working around the clock to patch hull damage and restore combat capability. The repairs weren't perfect, but they were good enough. On May 30th, Yorktown sailed for Midway. The 3 American carriers carried a total of 233 aircraft, including 112 Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bombers. These Dauntless aircraft would be the primary strike weapon against Japanese carriers. But success depended on finding the Japanese fleet, approaching without detection, and executing near-perfect dive-bombing attacks against ships defended by the most experienced anti-aircraft gunners in the Imperial Japanese Navy and protected by swarms of Zero fighters. The odds were not favorable. At the Battle of Coral Sea, American dive bombers had achieved approximately 15% hit rates against Japanese carriers. That meant 85% of bombs missed their targets. Against maneuvering warships defended by anti-aircraft fire and fighters, dive bombing was extremely difficult even under ideal conditions. The Douglas SBD Dauntless was specifically designed to improve those odds. The aircraft's development began in 1935, not at Douglas, but at Northrop Aircraft Company under the brilliant engineer Jack Northrop. Northrop was designing an aircraft called the BT-1, a carrier-based dive bomber for the U.S. Navy. The BT-1 first flew in August 1935 and showed promise, but it had problems. The aircraft was unstable in steep dives. The landing gear was unreliable. The engine overheated during prolonged operations. In 1937, Douglas Aircraft Company acquired Northrop Corporation. The BT-1 project transferred to Douglas, and a young engineer named Ed Heinemann was assigned to fix the aircraft's problems. Heinemann was 28 years old in 1937. He had joined Douglas in 1926 as a draftsman and worked his way up to chief engineer through extraordinary talent and relentless work ethic. Heinemann's design philosophy was simple. Every ounce of weight must serve a purpose. Every system must be reliable. Complexity is the enemy of combat effectiveness. When he examined the BT-1, Heinemann saw an aircraft that could become exceptional with focused improvements. He didn't need to redesign everything. He needed to fix specific problems: dive stability, landing gear reliability, engine cooling, and bomb delivery accuracy. Between November 1937 and April 1939, Heinemann transformed the BT-1 into the XBT-2 prototype, which became the XSBD-1, which became the production SBD-1 Dauntless. The changes were methodical and purposeful. First, dive stability. Heinemann designed perforated split flaps mounted on the upper and lower wing surfaces. When extended, these flaps created massive drag that limited dive speed to approximately 250 miles per hour, regardless of dive angle. This was revolutionary. Previous dive bombers accelerated uncontrollably in steep dives, forcing pilots to limit dive angles to 60-70 degrees to maintain control. The Dauntless could dive at 80-85 degrees, nearly vertical, while maintaining controllable speed. Steeper dives meant shorter time exposed to anti-aircraft fire and more accurate bomb delivery. Second, landing gear. The BT-1's landing gear retracted rearward into the wing, creating a weak point in the wing structure. Heinemann redesigned the gear to retract laterally outward into the wing, distributing loads across stronger structural members. The new design added only 12 pounds but increased strength by 400%. Landing gear failures, which had plagued the BT-1, virtually disappeared on the Dauntless. Third, engine cooling. The BT-1's Wright R1820 engine overheated during prolonged combat operations. Heinemann enlarged the oil cooler, redesigned the cowling to improve airflow, and added adjustable cowl flaps that pilots could open during climbs and close during dives. Engine overheating problems were eliminated. Fourth, bomb delivery. This was Heinemann's masterpiece. Carrier-based dive bombers faced a unique problem. The bomb, when released during a dive, would continue traveling at the aircraft's speed, 250 mph downward and forward. If released directly beneath the aircraft, the bomb would strike the propeller. Previous dive bombers solved this by pulling out of the dive slightly before releasing the bomb, reducing accuracy. Heinemann designed a displacement crutch, a mechanical arm mounted on the aircraft's centerline that held a 1,000-pound bomb beneath the fuselage. When the pilot pressed the bomb release, the crutch swung the bomb forward and down, clear of the propeller disc, before releasing it. The pilot could release the bomb while still in a full vertical dive, maintaining maximum accuracy. The U.S. Navy contracted with Douglas Aircraft Company for 144 production SBD-1 aircraft in April 1939. The aircraft would be designated Scout Bomber Douglas, SBD. Someone at Douglas suggested the name Dauntless. The name stuck. The SBD-1 entered service with Marine Corps Squadron VMB-2 in June 1940. The SBD-2 followed in November 1940 with increased fuel capacity. The SBD-3, which would be the primary variant at Midway, entered service in March 1941 with self-sealing fuel tanks, armor plating for the crew, bulletproof windscreen, and increased armament. By June 1942, the SBD-3 Dauntless had the following specifications: length 33 feet 1 inch, wingspan 41 feet 6 inches, height 13 feet 7 inches, empty weight 6,404 pounds, maximum takeoff weight 10,700 pounds. The aircraft was powered by a single Wright R1820 52 9-cylinder radial engine producing 1,000 horsepower at 2,500 RPM, driving a Hamilton Standard 3-bladed constant-speed propeller with a diameter of 10 feet 3 inches. Maximum speed at 14,000 feet was 255 miles per hour. Cruising speed was 185 miles per hour. Stall speed with flaps down was 78 miles per hour. Rate of climb at sea level was 1,190 feet per minute. Service ceiling was 25,530 feet. Combat range with a 1,000-pound bomb load was 950 miles. Maximum ferry range was 1,115 miles. The crew consisted of two: pilot in the forward cockpit, radio man gunner in the rear cockpit, separated by a fuel tank holding 65 gallons. Additional fuel tanks in the wings held 219 gallons total. All tanks were self-sealing, lined with rubber that would swell and seal bullet holes when punctured. Armament included two Browning M250 caliber machine guns mounted in the engine cowling with 360 rounds per gun. The guns were synchronized to fire through the propeller disc at a rate of 750 rounds per minute combined. Two Browning M1919 .30 caliber machine guns were flexibly mounted in the rear cockpit with 2,000 rounds total, operated by the radio man gunner using a ring mount that allowed 360-degree traverse. Armament included two 50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns mounted in the engine cowling, firing forward. Two 30 caliber Browning M1919 machine guns were flexibly mounted in the rear cockpit, operated by the radio man gunner. Bomb load consisted of one 1,000-pound bomb mounted on a centerline displacement rack under the fuselage, plus two 100-pound bombs on wing racks, for a total of 200 pounds. The centerline bomb rack was ingenious. When the pilot released the bomb, the rack swung the bomb forward and down, clear of the propeller arc, before releasing it. This prevented the bomb from hitting the propeller during the dive. But the Dauntless's most important feature was its dive brakes. Mounted on the upper and lower surfaces of the wings, these perforated split flaps could be extended during a dive to limit the aircraft's speed to approximately 250 miles per hour, even in a near-vertical descent. This allowed pilots to aim precisely during the dive without the aircraft accelerating to uncontrollable speeds. Standard dive bombing doctrine called for pilots to roll inverted at altitude, pull the nose down to achieve 70-90 degree dive angle, extend dive brakes, aim using a telescopic sight mounted in the cockpit, release the bomb at 2,500 feet altitude, and pull out of the dive at 1,500 to 2,000 feet. At 70-degree dive angle from 10,000 feet, the pilot had approximately 15 seconds from nose down to bomb release. During those 15 seconds, he had to maintain precise dive angle, compensate for wind drift, track the moving target, account for the target's speed and direction, and release the bomb at exactly the right moment. If the dive angle was too steep, the bomb would fall short. If too shallow, it would overshoot. If released too early, it would miss ahead of the target. If too late, it would miss behind. The margin for error was measured in fractions of a second and single degrees of angle. Japanese carriers could maneuver at 30-32 knots, approximately 35 miles per hour. During the 15 seconds a Dauntless pilot was diving, the target carrier would travel approximately 800 feet. The pilot had to aim not at where the carrier was, but at where it would be when the bomb arrived. This required split-second calculations performed while pulling 4-5 G-forces in a screaming dive toward a ship shooting back with 25mm anti-aircraft guns. The skill required was extraordinary. Training a competent dive bomber pilot took 24 months of intensive flight instruction. Training an exceptional dive bomber pilot took years of practice and combat experience. Can one obsolete aircraft, considered too slow to survive modern combat, sink 4 aircraft carriers and change the course of World War II? Can 112 Dauntless dive bombers, flown by pilots, many with less than 1 year of carrier experience, defeat the most experienced naval aviation force on Earth? Please like this video to see how this turns out. Subscribe for more unlikely heroes of World War II, and let's continue to the morning of June 4th, 1942. At 4:30 a.m. on June 4th, 1942, Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, commanding the Japanese carrier strike force from his flagship Akagi, ordered the launch of the first attack wave against Midway Atoll. 108 aircraft, 36 Aichi D-3A Val dive bombers, 36 Nakajima B-5N Kate torpedo bombers, and 36 Mitsubishi A-6M0 fighters launched from the 4 carriers and headed south toward Midway, 240 miles away. Nagumo kept a second strike wave of 93 aircraft armed and ready on the carrier decks, prepared to attack any American ships that might appear. These reserve aircraft carried armor-piercing bombs and torpedoes specifically designed for attacking warships. At 5:34 a.m., a U.S. Navy PBY Catalina patrol plane spotted the Japanese carriers. The pilot radioed, "Enemy carriers bearing 320, distance 180 miles." The message reached the 3 American carriers at 5:53 a.m. Admiral Fletcher, commanding overall operations from Yorktown, ordered Spruance to launch Enterprise and Hornet's strike groups immediately. Fletcher would hold Yorktown's aircraft in reserve until the location of all Japanese carriers was confirmed. At 7 a.m., Enterprise began launching its strike group. 37 Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bombers, 14 Douglas TBD-1 Devastator torpedo bombers, and 10 Grumman F-4F-4 Wildcat fighters took off and formed up. The strike group was led by Lieutenant Commander Wade McClusky, Enterprise's air group commander. At 7:55 a.m., Hornet began launching its strike group. 35 SBD-3 Dauntless dive bombers, 15 TBD-1 Devastators, and 10 F-4F-4 Wildcats launched and formed up. At 8:30 a.m., after confirmation that no additional Japanese carriers were in the area, Yorktown launched her strike group. 17 SBD-3 Dauntless dive bombers, 12 TBD-1 Devastators, and 6 F-4F-4 Wildcats. Total American strike force: 89 Dauntless dive bombers, 41 Devastator torpedo bombers, 26 Wildcat fighters, 156 aircraft heading toward 4 Japanese carriers defended by approximately 50 Zero fighters and bristling with anti-aircraft guns. The American aircraft flew separately, not as a coordinated strike group. Different speeds and climb rates meant the slow Devastator torpedo bombers couldn't keep up with the faster Dauntless dive bombers. The strike groups fragmented. Wildcats separated from bombers. Dive bombers separated from torpedo bombers. What was supposed to be a coordinated attack was becoming a disorganized series of piecemeal strikes. Meanwhile, Admiral Nagumo faced a critical decision. At 7:05 a.m., his strike aircraft returned from bombing Midway and reported, "Second strike necessary." Midway's defenses were still operational. Nagumo needed to launch another attack. But his reserve aircraft were armed with torpedoes and armor-piercing bombs for attacking ships, not high-explosive bombs for attacking land targets. At 7:15 a.m., Nagumo ordered the reserve aircraft rearmed with land attack bombs. Crews began the laborious process of moving aircraft below decks, removing torpedoes, removing armor-piercing bombs, and loading high-explosive bombs. The process would take approximately 90 minutes. Then, at 7:28 a.m., a Japanese scout plane reported 10 enemy surface ships sighted bearing 010, distance 240 miles. American ships. Nagumo faced a dilemma. Should he continue rearming for a second strike on Midway, or should he rearm again for attacking American ships? At 7:45 a.m., he made his decision. Stop rearming. Prepare to attack American ships. Load torpedoes and armor-piercing bombs. Crews who had just spent 30 minutes removing torpedoes and loading land attack bombs now had to reverse the process. Remove the land attack bombs, reload torpedoes and armor-piercing bombs. The carrier hangar decks became chaos. Bombs and torpedoes stacked everywhere. Aircraft crammed together. Fuel lines connected. Armament carts loaded with ammunition. At 8:30 a.m., Nagumo received another report. American aircraft approaching. The first strike wave from Midway, B-17 bombers at high altitude. Nagumo ordered fighters launched to intercept. Zeros shot down several American aircraft, but the high-altitude bombers scored no hits on the Japanese carriers. At 9:18 a.m., another wave arrived. Marine Corps dive bombers and torpedo bombers from Midway. They pressed their attacks courageously, but faced devastating Zero fighter opposition and intense anti-aircraft fire. 8 of 16 Marine SBD Dauntless dive bombers were shot down. 7 of 11 Marine Vindicator dive bombers were shot down. All 6 Marine TBF Avenger torpedo bombers were shot down. The attacks achieved no hits. The Japanese carriers maneuvered freely, dodging bombs and torpedoes, while Zeros massacred the American aircraft. At 9:30 a.m., the situation for the Japanese seemed completely under control. They had destroyed the American airstrikes from Midway with minimal damage to their own forces. Their carriers were preparing to launch a devastating strike against the American carrier fleet. Rearming was nearly complete. In 30 minutes, they would launch over 100 aircraft armed with torpedoes and armor-piercing bombs. The American carriers would be destroyed. But at 9:30 a.m., 15 Douglas TBD Devastator torpedo bombers from USS Hornet's Torpedo Squadron 8 appeared low on the horizon, approaching from the east. These aircraft, led by Lieutenant Commander John Waldron, were attacking without fighter escort and without dive bomber support. Waldron's squadron had become separated from Hornet's other aircraft and was attacking alone. The Devastators came in low and slow, 100 feet above the water, flying at 120 miles per hour, heading straight toward the Japanese carriers. Zeros dove on them immediately. The Devastators had no chance. The TBD was obsolete, slow, lightly armed, and carried unreliable Mark 13 torpedoes. Zeros shot them down one by one. Anti-aircraft fire from the carriers filled the sky. All 15 Devastators were shot down. Only one pilot, Ensign George Gay, survived. He watched the rest of the battle from the water, hidden under a seat cushion. 0 torpedo hits, total American casualties, 29 men killed. At 10 a.m., Enterprise's Torpedo Squadron 6 attacked. 14 Devastators, led by Lieutenant Commander Eugene Lindsay. Again, no fighter escort. Again, no coordination with dive bombers. The Zeros were waiting. All 14 Devastators were shot down, 0 torpedo hits. American casualties, 28 men killed. At 10:10 a.m., Yorktown's Torpedo Squadron 3 attacked. 12 Devastators, led by Lieutenant Commander Lance Massey. This squadron had 6 Wildcat fighters as escort, but the Wildcats were overwhelmed by superior numbers of Zeros. 10 of 12 Devastators were shot down. 2 torpedoes launched, both missed. American casualties, 21 men killed. In 40 minutes, 3 American torpedo squadrons, 41 aircraft, had been wiped out. Total hits on Japanese carriers, 0. Total American dead, 78 men. The torpedo attacks appeared to be a complete failure, a catastrophic waste of aircraft and lives. But those attacks had an unintended consequence. Every Zero fighter in the Japanese Combat Air Patrol had descended to sea level to massacre the torpedo bombers. The sky above 10,000 feet was empty of Japanese fighters. The dive bombers were about to arrive. At 9:20 a.m., Lieutenant Commander Wade McClusky, leading Enterprise's dive bomber group, had reached the position where intelligence predicted the Japanese carriers would be. But the ocean was empty. No carriers. The Japanese had changed course while the American aircraft were en route. McClusky had 37 Dauntless dive bombers, but no target. His fuel was running low. Standard procedure called for returning to Enterprise when fuel reached reserve levels. McClusky had perhaps 30 minutes of fuel remaining. He faced a choice: return to the carrier now with full bomb loads and no results, or continue searching and risk running out of fuel before finding the Japanese fleet. McClusky made what Admiral Nimitz would later call one of the most important decisions of the battle. He would continue searching. He reasoned that the Japanese carriers had to be northeast of the estimated position because they would be heading toward Midway for a second strike. At 9:55 a.m., McClusky spotted a lone Japanese destroyer moving northeast at high speed. The destroyer Arashi had been dropping depth charges on an American submarine. Now it was racing to rejoin the carrier fleet. McClusky followed the destroyer's wake. At 10:20 a.m., McClusky saw them. 4 Japanese carriers in a rough box formation. Akagi and Kaga to port. Soryu and Hiryu to starboard. All 4 carriers had aircraft on their decks, armed, fueled, ready to launch. The carriers were 20,000 feet below. McClusky's 37 Dauntless dive bombers approached from the southwest with the sun behind them. The Japanese lookouts, focused on the torpedo attacks at sea level, didn't see them. The Zero fighters, down at 500 feet chasing the last torpedo bombers, didn't see them. For 2 minutes, 37 American dive bombers positioned themselves for attack runs completely undetected. At 10:22 a.m., McClusky gave the order, "Attack!" He rolled his Dauntless inverted, pulled the nose down, and dove toward Kaga. Behind him, 37 aircraft followed. At the same moment, 17 Dauntless dive bombers from Yorktown's Bombing Squadron 3, led by Lieutenant Commander Maxwell Leslie, arrived from a different direction and began their attack on Soryu. The Japanese carriers had zero warning. The first indication of danger was the scream of dive brakes as 54 Dauntless dive bombers came down through 20,000 feet at 70-80-degree dive angles. The Japanese carriers began emergency turns, attempting to evade. Anti-aircraft guns opened fire. But it was too late. The Dauntless pilots were already in their dives. Nothing could stop them now. Lieutenant Dick Best, leading Enterprise's Bombing Squadron 6, dove on Akagi. His bomb sight centered on the red circle painted on the carrier's flight deck. At 2,500 feet altitude, traveling at 250 miles per hour in an 80-degree dive, Best released his 1,000-pound bomb. The bomb fell for 3.2 seconds and struck Akagi's flight deck just aft of the midship elevator. The bomb penetrated the flight deck, detonated in the hangar, and ignited aircraft, bombs, torpedoes, and fuel that were stacked everywhere from the incomplete rearming operations. Secondary explosions ripped through the hangar. Fires spread instantly. Within 2 minutes, Akagi was burning from bow to stern. Lieutenant Commander McClusky and his wingmen dove on Kaga. McClusky's bomb struck near the island superstructure. His wingman's bomb hit forward of the island. A third bomb hit aft near the stern. All 3 bombs penetrated the flight deck and detonated in the hangar, igniting the same catastrophic secondary explosions. Kaga's hangar became an inferno. More bombs hit. Fuel tanks exploded. Torpedo warheads detonated. The carrier's structure buckled from internal explosions. Lieutenant Commander Leslie led Yorktown's bombers against Soryu. 3 bombs hit the carrier in rapid succession. All 3 penetrated the flight deck. All 3 detonated in the hangar. Soryu erupted in flames. The carrier's damage control teams tried desperately to contain the fires, but the secondary explosions were too severe. Fuel, ammunition, and ordnance stacked in the hangar created uncontrollable fires that spread faster than damage control teams could fight them. From first bomb release at 10:22 a.m. to final bomb impacts at 10:26 a.m., 4 minutes. 3 Japanese fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, transformed from fully operational warships preparing to launch a devastating strike into burning wrecks. The attacks had been near perfect. Out of approximately 40 bombs dropped by Enterprise and Yorktown dive bombers, 13 scored direct hits. Hit rate, 32.5%. More than double the historical average for dive bombing attacks. Why were the attacks so successful? First, complete surprise. The Japanese had no warning until the dive bombers were already diving. Zero fighters were out of position at low altitude. Second, perfect positioning. The Dauntless aircraft attacked with the sun behind them from 20,000 feet. Third, target vulnerability. The Japanese carriers had their hangar decks packed with armed, fueled aircraft surrounded by bombs and torpedoes. 1 bomb penetrating the flight deck was enough to ignite catastrophic secondary explosions. Fourth, pilot skill. The Dauntless crews executed textbook dive bombing attacks under ideal conditions. But the battle wasn't over. 1 Japanese carrier remained operational. Hiryu, positioned 10 miles north of the other 3 carriers, had not been attacked. At 10:40 a.m., Hiryu launched an 18-aircraft strike against the American carriers. At 12 UAS p.m., Japanese dive bombers attacked USS Yorktown, scoring 3 bomb hits that disabled the carrier. At 2:30 p.m., Hiryu launched a second strike with 10 torpedo bombers. At 2:45 p.m., 2 torpedoes hit Yorktown, forcing the crew to abandon ship. But at 3:30 p.m., American scout planes located Hiryu. At 5:00 p.m., 24 Dauntless dive bombers from Enterprise, led by Lieutenant Earl Gallagher, attacked Hiryu. 4 bombs hit the carrier. All 4 penetrated the flight deck. All 4 detonated in the hangar, igniting the same catastrophic secondary explosions that had destroyed Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu. Hiryu burned through the night. At 2:30 a.m. on June 5th, the carrier's commanding officer, Captain Tomeo Kaku, and Rear Admiral Taman Yamaguchi chose to go down with their ship. The carrier sank at 9 a.m. on June 5th. 4 Japanese fleet carriers sunk. Akagi, 267 crew killed, 34,364 tons displacement, total loss. Kaga, 811 crew killed, 38,200 tons displacement, total loss. Soryu, 711 crew killed, 18,800 tons displacement, total loss. Hiryu, 392 crew killed, 20,250 tons displacement, total loss. Combined, 2,181 Japanese dead, 111 614 tons of carriers sunk, approximately 280 aircraft destroyed. American losses: USS Yorktown sunk by Japanese submarine I-168 on June 7th after 3 days of salvage efforts. USS Haman, a destroyer providing support to Yorktown, also sunk by submarine torpedo. 145 American aircraft destroyed. 307 American personnel killed. The battle decisively shifted the balance of naval power in the Pacific. Japan lost 4 of its 6 fleet carriers, 2/3 of its carrier force. More critically, Japan lost many of its most experienced pilots, aircrew, and maintenance personnel. These losses could not be replaced. Japan's naval aviation never recovered. The Battle of Midway marked the end of Japanese offensive operations in the Pacific. Every subsequent battle would see Japan defending territory already conquered, not expanding conquest further. The Douglas SBD Dauntless, dismissed as obsolete and too slow to survive, had sunk more tonnage of enemy warships in 6 minutes than any other aircraft type in any battle in history. The Easy Meat had destroyed the most powerful carrier force on Earth. How? Not through speed, not through advanced technology, not through superior numbers, through accuracy. The Dauntless dive bombers achieved hit rates of 32.5% at Midway compared to torpedo bombers that achieved 0% hit rate. That difference in accuracy determined the outcome of the battle and arguably the outcome of the Pacific War. Post-war analysis by U.S. naval historians concluded that the Dauntless's dive brakes were the single most important design feature. By limiting dive speed to 250 mph even in near-vertical dives, the perforated split flaps allowed pilots to aim precisely during the 15-second dive from 10,000 feet to 2,500 feet. Without dive brakes, aircraft accelerated to 400+ mph in steep dives, making precise aiming impossible. Japanese Naval dive bombers, which lacked effective dive brakes, achieved hit rates of approximately 10–15% in most engagements. The Dauntless's 32.5% hit rate at Midway was more than double the Japanese average. The Dauntless continued serving throughout the Pacific War. Between June 1942 and August 1945, SBD Dauntless aircraft sank more enemy shipping than any other Allied aircraft. Over 300,000 tons, including 18 major warships ranging from destroyers to battleships. The aircraft participated in every major naval engagement in the Pacific: Guadalcanal, Eastern Solomons, Santa Cruz, Philippine Sea, Leyte Gulf. Dauntless crews achieved ace status by shooting down enemy aircraft in defensive actions. The aircraft earned the nickname Slow but Deadly, an affectionate play on its SBD designation, from pilots who respected its ruggedness, reliability, and accuracy. Production continued through 1944. Total production: 5,136 aircraft, including variants for the U.S. Navy, U.S. Marine Corps, U.S. Army Air Forces, designated A-24 Banshee, and Allied forces including New Zealand and France. The aircraft was finally replaced in frontline service by the Curtiss SB-2C Helldiver starting in late 1943, but many pilots preferred the older Dauntless. The Helldiver was faster and carried more bombs, but it had handling problems, maintenance issues, and could not match the Dauntless's dive-bombing accuracy. Many squadrons continued flying Dauntless aircraft until the end of the war, despite having Helldivers available. Lieutenant Commander Wade McClusky, whose decision to continue searching beyond fuel reserves led directly to finding the Japanese carriers, was born in Buffalo, New York in 1902. He graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy in 1926, earned his wings in 1929, and spent 12 years as a naval aviator before Midway. On June 4, 1942, at age 40, McClusky was older than most dive bomber pilots by 15 to 20 years. But his experience proved decisive. When his fuel gauges showed only 30 minutes of fuel remaining and the ocean below showed no Japanese carriers, younger pilots might have panicked and returned to Enterprise. McClusky remained calm, analyzed the tactical situation, reasoned that the Japanese must be northeast of their estimated position, spotted the destroyer Arashi racing northeast, followed its wake, and found the carriers. That sequence of decisions, made under extreme time pressure with fuel running critically low, exemplified the judgment that comes only from years of experience. McClusky was awarded the Navy Cross, the second highest decoration for valor. He survived the war, commanded the carrier USS Corregidor, and retired as a rear admiral in 1956. He died in 1976 at age 74. Lieutenant Richard Halsey Best, known as Dick Best, whose 1,000-pound bomb crippled Akagi, had one of the most remarkable and tragic stories of any Midway pilot. Best was born in Bayonne, New Jersey, in 1910. He graduated from the Naval Academy in 1932 and earned his wings in 1935. By June 1942, he was commanding officer of Bombing Squadron 6, Enterprise's elite dive bomber squadron. On the morning of June 4th, Best led his squadron down through 20,000 feet toward Kaga. But Best saw that other Enterprise dive bombers were already attacking Kaga. Rather than waste bombs on a target already being destroyed, Best made a split-second decision to change targets mid-dive. He pulled out of his dive on Kaga, climbed back to altitude burning precious fuel, positioned himself over Akagi, and dove again. His bomb struck Akagi's flight deck at 10:26 a.m., penetrated to the hangar, and ignited the catastrophic secondary explosions that doomed the flagship. That evening, Best led another strike against Hiryu, the last surviving Japanese carrier. His bomb scored another direct hit. Best was one of only 4 pilots in history to successfully attack and damage 2 separate enemy carriers in a single day. But Best's victory came at terrible personal cost. During the morning dive on Akagi, Best's oxygen system malfunctioned. Instead of delivering pure oxygen, the system delivered caustic soda fumes, sodium hydroxide vapor from a damaged CO2 scrubber. Best inhaled the caustic fumes for 15 minutes during the dive and return flight. The fumes seared his lungs. By the time he landed on Enterprise after the evening strike on Hiryu, Best was coughing blood. Medical examination revealed severe chemical burns to his lung tissue. Over the following months, the damage developed into tuberculosis. Best, the most successful dive bomber pilot at the most important naval battle in history, was medically retired in 1944 at age 34 with 100% disability. He spent 1 year in a naval hospital. The tuberculosis never fully healed. Best lived another 57 years, working as a real estate broker in California, rarely speaking about Midway. He died in 2001 at age 91, the last surviving dive bomber pilot who had attacked a Japanese carrier on June 4, 1942. Lieutenant Commander Maxwell Franklin Leslie, who led Yorktown's Bombing Squadron 3 in the attack on Soryu, was born in West Jefferson, Ohio in 1902. He graduated from the Naval Academy in 1926, the same class as Wade McClusky. Leslie earned his wings in 1929 and became one of the Navy's most experienced dive bomber pilots. On June 4th, Leslie led 17 Dauntless dive bombers from Yorktown. During the flight to the target, Leslie's centerline bomb release malfunctioned, and his 1,000-pound bomb fell off prematurely into the ocean. Leslie continued to the target without a bomb, led his squadron into the attack dive on Soryu, and directed his wingmen's bomb drops despite having no weapon himself. 3 of his squadron's bombs struck Soryu, sinking the carrier in 4 minutes. Leslie's aircraft was hit by anti-aircraft fire during the dive, damaging his hydraulic system. He nursed the crippled aircraft back to Yorktown, landed successfully despite damaged landing gear, and was immediately assigned to lead another strike. Hours later, when Yorktown was hit by Japanese dive bombers, Leslie's aircraft was destroyed on deck. He survived, transferred to Enterprise with other Yorktown aircrew, and flew the evening strike against Hiryu. Leslie survived the war, commanded the carrier USS Saratoga, and retired as a commander in 1956. He died in 1985 at age 83. Norman Jack "Dusty" Kleiss, an Enterprise dive bomber pilot, achieved something unprecedented at Midway: 3 bomb hits on 3 separate targets in a single day. Kleiss was born in Coffeyville, Kansas, in 1916. He graduated from the Naval Academy in 1938 and earned his wings in 1939, making him one of the junior pilots at Midway with only 3 years of flight experience. But Kleiss proved to be a natural dive bomber pilot with exceptional eyesight and steady nerves. On the morning of June 4th, Kleiss dove on the carrier Kaga. His 1,000-pound bomb struck the carrier's flight deck and penetrated to the hangar. That evening, Kleiss flew a second strike against Hiryu. His bomb struck the carrier amidships. Hours later, Kleiss flew a third mission against the heavy cruiser Mikuma. His bomb struck the cruiser's bridge, killing the captain and senior officers. 3 bombs, 3 hits, 3 separate targets. Hit rate, 100%. Kleiss was the only pilot at Midway to achieve 3 hits. He survived the war, flew 58 combat missions total, and retired from the Navy in 1962. He wrote a memoir titled Never Call Me a Hero, published in 2017. Kleiss died in 2016 at age 100, just months before his memoir's publication. These pilots, McClusky, Best, Leslie, Kleiss, and dozens more, were ordinary men thrust into extraordinary circumstances. They weren't superheroes. They were professional naval aviators doing the job they'd trained for. But their skill, courage, and determination on June 4, 1942, changed the course of history. Of the 156 American aircrew who participated in the strike against the Japanese carriers on June 4, 1942, 78 were killed in action during the torpedo attacks. Another 15 were killed during the dive bombing attacks. 63 survived the battle. Many went on to distinguished careers. Some became aces. Some rose to admiral rank. All remembered June 4, 1942, as the day when everything changed. Norman "Dusty" Kleiss, an Enterprise SBD pilot who scored 3 bomb hits at Midway, 1 on Kaga, 2 on Hiryu, later wrote, "We were flying an obsolete aircraft. Everyone knew it. The Japanese knew it. We knew it. But we also knew that if we could get into our dive and line up our sight, we could hit a moving ship from 10,000 feet. That's what the Dauntless did better than any other aircraft in the world. It put the bomb exactly where the pilot aimed it. At Midway, that accuracy was more valuable than speed, more valuable than advanced weapons, more valuable than anything else. We didn't need to be faster than the Zeros. We just needed to hit the carriers, and we did." The Douglas SBD Dauntless demonstrated that in warfare, technological superiority isn't always determined by the newest, fastest, or most advanced weapons. Sometimes, a well-designed weapon optimized for a specific mission and operated by well-trained personnel achieves results that no amount of advanced technology can match. The Dauntless wasn't faster than enemy fighters. It wasn't more advanced than newer bombers. It was simply more accurate, and at Midway, accuracy was everything. The aircraft's nickname, slow but deadly, perfectly captured its character. Yes, it was slow. At 255 mph maximum speed, it was 75 mph slower than the fighters trying to shoot it down. But it was deadly. More deadly than faster aircraft. More deadly than newer technology. Deadly because it could put a 1,000-pound bomb through a carrier's flight deck from 2 miles up while traveling at 250 mph in an 80-degree dive. No other aircraft could do that with 32.5% accuracy. That's the story of the Battle of Midway and the Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bomber that the Japanese called easy meat and obsolete, right up until those same aircraft sank 4 carriers in 6 minutes and changed the course of World War II. That's the story of how accuracy defeated speed, how precision defeated technology, and how an obsolete aircraft achieved the most decisive victory in naval aviation history. If stories like this remind you why we preserve history, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel for more forgotten heroes and unexpected victories. Turn on that notification bell so you never miss these stories. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Tell us if anyone in your family served at Midway or in the Pacific War. Tell us if you've ever seen a Dauntless in a museum. We read every single comment. These stories matter. These heroes deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make sure they never disappear into silence. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next one.